stop everything. Not just your movement, not just your words, but the endless effort of trying to reach something higher, something distant, something you believe you lack. The greatest mistake ever made in prayer is the belief that power exists somewhere outside of you, waiting to be persuaded, convinced, or moved by pleading words. This belief has kept countless seekers striving, struggling, and wondering why their prayers feel unanswered. The revolution begins the moment you stop trying to make prayer work and allow prayer to happen. Prayer was never meant to be an act of asking. Asking assumes absence, separation, and limitation. The moment you ask for peace, you silently confess you do not have it. The moment you ask for healing, you declare illness has authority. This hidden assumption blocks the very harmony you seek. True prayer begins when you withdraw from words and rest in the awareness that nothing needs to be added, corrected, or improved in the infinite order of life. Prayer is commonly understood as a request for change, a moment where a person speaks to a higher power in hopes that circumstances, conditions, or people will be altered. This approach quietly assumes that something is wrong, missing, or incomplete in the present moment. It places truth, harmony, and peace somewhere in the future, dependent on whether the prayer is answered. This misunderstanding turns prayer into effort, and often into frustration, because it is rooted in the belief of separation. Awakening prayer begins when this assumption is questioned and released. True prayer does not attempt to persuade or inform an infinite intelligence. It is not a negotiation, nor is it a plea. It is an inner recognition that the fullness of life is already established and present. When prayer becomes asking, attention is fixed on lack. When prayer becomes awakening, attention shifts to awareness. This awareness reveals that peace is not created through prayer, but uncovered by it. Healing is not produced, but recognized. Guidance is not sent from afar, but realized from within. Awakening prayer requires a shift from mental activity to spiritual awareness. The mind wants to analyze, define, and control outcomes, but prayer that awakens moves beyond mental patterns. It rests in quiet receptivity. In this stillness, the individual is no longer trying to make something happen. Instead, they are allowing truth to reveal itself. This revelation does not come as dramatic signs or voices, but as a deep inner knowing, a sense of rightness that needs no explanation. When prayer is no longer about changing conditions, fear begins to dissolve. Fear survives on the belief that something essential is absent or threatened. Awakening exposes fear as a misinterpretation of reality. The moment one becomes aware of the underlying wholeness of life, fear loses its authority. This does not mean challenges disappear instantly, but their meaning changes. They are no longer enemies to be fought, but signals drawing attention back to inner alignment. This form of prayer transforms daily living. Instead of turning to prayer only in moments of crisis, life itself becomes prayerful. Listening replaces asking. Trust replaces effort. The individual becomes less reactive and more receptive. Decisions arise naturally without strain. Relationships soften because there is no longer an attempt to fix or change others through spiritual means. There is an understanding that harmony unfolds as awareness deepens. Awakening prayer also removes the pressure of results. Since it is not performed to obtain something, there is no anxiety about whether it worked. The act of recognizing truth is complete in itself. In that recognition, the outer experience gradually aligns with the inner realization, not through force, but through the natural law of correspondence. This quiet awakening is the foundation of all genuine spiritual transformation. True prayer is not found in the repetition of words or the crafting of clever phrases. It is found in silence and stillness. The constant business of the mind, its chatter, worries, and plans, often obscures the presence of the divine. People believe that the louder, longer, or more urgent their prayers are, the more they will be heard, yet the very act of overdoing prayer can create a barrier. The soul's voice is subtle, delicate, and requires quiet attention to be heard. Silence is the doorway through which spiritual power flows because it allows the inner presence to emerge without interference. Stillness is not merely physical calmness, it is a state of mental and emotional surrender. When the mind stops racing, when thought does not insist on its own solution, a deeper intelligence takes over. This stillness is like water settling after a storm. In the turbulence of mental activity, clarity cannot form, and the deeper currents of insight are hidden. By embracing stillness, one allows these currents to rise naturally, carrying understanding, guidance, and healing. It is in these moments that the answers sought in prayer are quietly revealed. The power of silence lies in its ability to release control. Most people approach prayer with a sense of needing to achieve a particular outcome, to convince or instruct a higher intelligence. This attitude keeps the individual focused on absence rather than presence, on what is missing rather than what is already complete. Stillness shifts attention from striving to receiving. When the mind rests, the soul awakens. The effort to manipulate circumstances is replaced by the ability to perceive and align with the underlying harmony of life. In this alignment, life's natural intelligence can act without obstruction. In stillness, one also experiences a profound connection with what cannot be seen or measured. The outer world is busy, noisy, and demanding, but the inner world contains the eternal and unchanging truth. When the mind is silent, awareness of this inner reality grows. Spiritual energy is not something to be summoned or forced, it is something to be noticed and allowed. The moment of stillness is a portal to this recognition. Through this portal, inspiration, insight, and guidance flow as effortlessly as sunlight through the sky. The discipline of cultivating silence and stillness is both simple and transformative. It requires no special words, no elaborate rituals, and no schedules, only the willingness to pause and observe. With practice, the individual begins to notice that the presence they seek is not distant or conditional. It is ever present, awaiting recognition in the quiet moments of attention. This understanding changes the very nature of prayer. It is no longer a task or obligation, but a living experience of communion with the infinite. In this way, silence and stillness become the most powerful method for awakening the true potential of prayer. True prayer is not about imposing personal will upon life, it is about releasing it entirely. Most people approach prayer with a mental picture of what should happen, believing that persistence, insistence, or clever phrasing can influence the outcome. This approach assumes that the individual is separate from the intelligence that governs life, and that by pushing, asking, or pleading, they can compel the universe to act. Yet the very act of trying to control, to direct, or to demand creates resistance. The deeper truth is that the divine operates effortlessly, and interference from personal desire often blocks its natural flow. Releasing personal will in prayer is not an act of weakness, but of profound trust. It is the recognition that life already possesses an inherent order, intelligence, and purpose, and that human effort cannot improve upon this perfection. When a person ceases to insist on their own plan, they make space for a higher intelligence to operate freely. In this space, solutions, healing, and guidance arise naturally, without strain, effort, or struggle. The act of surrender does not mean inaction, it means aligning with what already is, rather than imposing what one thinks should be. This principle also transforms the way challenges are experienced. When personal will is dominant, problems appear as obstacles to be overcome through effort or manipulation. Releasing will changes the perspective. Difficulties are seen as opportunities for insight, for growth, or for the revelation of a deeper order. The individual begins to sense that every circumstance contains the seed of resolution, and that their task is not to force outcomes, but to align with the intelligence that brings them forth. In this way, prayer becomes less about negotiation and more about awareness. Releasing personal will also quiets the inner conflict that so often accompanies prayer. Desire, fear, and expectation create mental turbulence, which obscures clarity and blocks the recognition of divine guidance. When will is surrendered, this turbulence subsides, leaving a calm space where intuition and understanding naturally emerge. It is in this calm that prayer reveals its transformative power. The answers are not imposed by human effort, but are discovered as a natural unfolding within consciousness. The moment personal will is set aside, prayer ceases to be a task and becomes a state of receptivity. It is no longer the individual acting upon life, but life acting through the individual. Healing occurs without struggle, insight comes without effort, and peace replaces anxiety. This method, subtle yet revolutionary, uncovers the essential principle of all true prayer. It is the recognition of what is already whole, complete and perfect, and the willingness to allow that wholeness to manifest effortlessly through consciousness. In this way, the release of personal will is not only the key to effective prayer, but the gateway to spiritual awakening and transformation. True prayer is not about the repetition of words, formulas, or phrases. It is about recognition. Many people mistakenly believe that the effectiveness of prayer lies in speaking the right words, in memorizing passages, or in performing rituals. This approach treats prayer as an action, a task to be completed, rather than an experience to be realized. Recognition-based prayer shifts the focus from doing to perceiving, from effort to awareness. It begins with understanding that the essence of prayer is not to convince or command life to respond, but to acknowledge the truth that is always present. Recognition in prayer requires a change in consciousness. When words are used as tools to persuade, the mind dominates the experience, and the deeper presence of life is obscured. True recognition does not depend on language. It is an inner acknowledgement of what already exists. Peace, harmony, love, and guidance are not distant rewards to be earned, but realities that are constantly available. The act of recognition simply brings awareness to these truths. When the seeker sees this clearly, the illusion of lack dissolves and the mind aligns with the infinite order of life. This form of prayer also emphasizes the importance of seeing beyond appearances. Often, people pray in reaction to circumstances, believing that external conditions reflect reality. Recognition-based prayer understands that the outer world is a reflection of inner awareness. By acknowledging the divine presence, the inherent perfection, and the wholeness that already exists within, the individual begins to perceive the same in the world around them. The focus is no longer on changing conditions but on changing perception, understanding that the underlying truth has always been intact. Recognition-based prayer transforms the relationship between the individual and the unseen. Instead of attempting to instruct or inform, the seeker simply acknowledges the presence, intelligence, and order that governs life. This acknowledgement is not passive. It is an active engagement of consciousness with reality. It requires attention, sincerity, and a willingness to let go of the ego's assumptions about how things should be. As this practice deepens, the individual discovers that healing, guidance, and inspiration arise naturally, not as a response to demand, but as a natural unfolding of what is already present. By emphasizing recognition rather than repetition, prayer becomes effortless and deeply empowering. It removes the sense of struggle, the anxiety about results, and the need to control outcomes. Instead, it cultivates clarity, peace, and alignment. The act of seeing what is true awakens consciousness to the divine order and allows life to flow harmoniously. Through recognition, prayer ceases to be a means to an end and becomes a living experience of unity, understanding, and connection with the infinite intelligence that pervades all existence. True prayer is not an external effort to achieve healing or guidance. It is an inward recognition of what already exists. Many people approach prayer as if it were a tool to fix problems, correct mistakes, or influence circumstances. This perspective assumes that divine assistance is something distant, conditional, or dependent upon human effort. In reality, the healing and guidance that prayer offers are not generated through asking, pleading, or manipulating outcomes. They emerge naturally from awareness when the mind stops trying to control and begins to perceive. The foundation of this understanding is the recognition that life is inherently whole and intelligent. Illness, confusion, or difficulty are not separate forces to be battled, but signals pointing toward a deeper truth within consciousness. When a person prays with this awareness, they are not attempting to impose change, but are opening themselves to perceive what is already present. Healing occurs not because something is added to the individual, but because the consciousness shifts to recognize wholeness that has never been absent. Guidance arises not because new knowledge is delivered, but because the mind aligns with the inherent wisdom of life. Prayer in this sense is an act of alignment rather than effort. Most attempts at prayer focus on persuading life to conform to desire, which inevitably creates tension, doubt, and frustration. In contrast, when the focus is on inward perception, the practitioner moves from effort to receptivity, the mind becomes quiet, and the heart becomes open. This quieting of thought allows the natural intelligence within to emerge, revealing solutions, insights, and clarity without force. It is a subtle, effortless unfolding that cannot be measured by external accomplishment, but is deeply felt in consciousness. Healing through awareness is also inclusive, affecting mind, body, and spirit simultaneously. The moment the individual recognizes the wholeness of life, fear and limitation lose their influence. Anxiety diminishes because the mind no longer depends on external proof. Physical and emotional patterns respond because consciousness perceives a higher order, and the body, reflecting awareness, naturally aligns. Guidance appears as intuitive understanding, not as imposed instructions, allowing the individual to navigate life with confidence and ease. This understanding of prayer transforms daily living. It removes the burden of trying to make things happen and replaces it with trust in the intelligence already present. Prayer becomes a lived experience, a continual inner acknowledgement that harmony, wisdom, and health are never absent. The practitioner learns that the role is not to demand or manipulate, but to recognize, align, and allow. In this state, the effects of prayer, healing, insight, and guidance emerge effortlessly, reflecting the natural, unbroken wholeness that exists in every moment. Surrender is the heart of transformative prayer, yet it is widely misunderstood. Many approach prayer with the assumption that effort, insistence, and precise wording are necessary to produce results. This perspective arises from a belief in separation, that life, intelligence, or divinity exists outside of oneself and must be persuaded to act. True prayer reveals that this is not the case. Surrender does not mean weakness or passivity. It is a conscious release of the ego's need to control, correct, or dictate outcomes. It is a recognition that life already contains harmony, wisdom, and perfection, and that resistance only obstructs their expression. Fear often dominates human consciousness because it arises from the belief in incompleteness or lack. The ego clings to control in an effort to secure security and certainty, yet this very clinging amplifies anxiety and tension. Surrender in prayer dissolves fear by demonstrating that nothing essential is missing. When the mind releases its grip on results, it allows a deeper intelligence to operate without obstruction. This is not a passive waiting but an active state of receptivity, where one aligns with the natural flow of life instead of opposing it. Surrender also transforms the way challenges are perceived. Circumstances that once felt threatening or insurmountable are now seen as part of a larger pattern of order and wisdom. Rather than struggling to change outcomes, the individual learns to observe and align with the underlying truth. In this alignment, solutions emerge effortlessly, guidance becomes clear, and healing manifests naturally. The sense of struggle fades because the mind no longer attempts to manufacture results. It rests in the awareness that life expresses itself fully when interference is removed. The practice of surrender deepens spiritual awareness by fostering trust. Trust is not conditional upon external circumstances but arises from an inner recognition that intelligence, love, and harmony are ever present. Prayer, in this state, ceases to be about asking for intervention and becomes an experience of communion with the infinite. Thoughts, words, and emotions are no longer tools to influence outcomes, but expressions of alignment with what is already true. the individual discovers that the divine presence is not distant or hidden, but intimately connected with every moment of consciousness. Surrender ultimately allows life to unfold without anxiety, tension, or resistance. Miracles and guidance are not sought as separate events, but arise naturally from the harmony that exists within. The act of letting go does not diminish awareness or responsibility, it amplifies perception and clarity, creating a state in which prayer is no longer a task but a living expression of unity. In this surrender, fear dissolves, harmony becomes visible, and the natural intelligence of life reveals itself effortlessly, guiding the individual with precision, grace, and profound ease. In essence, revolutionary prayer is not about striving, asking, or controlling. It is about awakening to the reality that life is already whole, intelligent, and harmonious. It begins when effort is replaced by stillness, when personal will is surrendered, and when recognition takes the place of repetition. Silence becomes the doorway to insight, awareness becomes the source of healing, and surrender dissolves fear, allowing divine intelligence to flow freely through consciousness. Prayer transforms from a task into a living experience, not something we do, but something we become. By stopping the constant effort to manipulate life, and instead aligning with the eternal presence within, we enter a state where miracles, guidance, and peace are not distant hopes but natural expressions of reality. This method awakens the true power of prayer, revealing that all we have ever sought is already present, waiting for us to recognize it, trust it, and allow it to manifest effortlessly in every moment.